Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chiavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA oddsmaker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, hits, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAOddsBreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by BetDSI. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC 222 event, which takes place in Las Vegas, Nevada. If you're unfamiliar with our format, Nick and I will break down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Looking back at our last event, we lost 1.65 units for UFC on Fox 28 after going 0-1 on our premium bets. But we also won our half-unit free bet on Marion Renault inside the distance prop at over plus 400 odds. Back to the present, UFC 222 features a 12-fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass, Fox Sports 1, and pay-per-view this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking things off on Fight Pass is a light heavyweight contest between Jordan Johnson, who is 8-0, and Adam Milstead, who is 8-1. Now, Nick, where did the lines open for this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Johnson opened minus 275, Milstead at plus 195. Now, these odds are courtesy of one of our staff writers, actually, Adam Martin. He did his UFC 222 opening odds reactions based on the opening lines that were sent out offshore. So make sure you check out the article that Adam has up on MMAOddsBreaker.com. That's where I'm reading the lines from. So these are all openers that happen offshore. So again, Johnson minus 275, the comeback on Milstead plus 195. Now looking over to our sponsored sportsbook, BetDSI, it is currently minus 301 for Johnson. The comeback on Milstead is at plus 241. So a little bit more action coming in Johnson's way. Not really that surprised. I mean, if you look back at, the last fight that Milstead had, he got absolutely just dominated on the ground. I mean, ragdolled by a wrestler in Curtis Blades. Now, of course, we know that Johnson's background is also wrestling. He's an All-American wrestler. That's what he does best. He does have a little bit of stand-up, Johnson does. He got a pretty solid jiu-jitsu game to go along with it as well, but his path to victory here is definitely going to want to repeat what Blades was able to do against Milstead. So Milstead is dropping to 205 pounds. Obviously, he was a little small for the heavyweight division. Now at 205, it's going to be interesting to see how he does here, because if his takedown defense holds up, the guy has some power and he's got some skill as well. So this is going to be a good fight, especially because I think Johnson might be getting a little bit too much respect overall from the bettors, from the community out there. I haven't been that impressed with him, honestly. Even, he's been fighting on some of the Access TV cards before he entered the UFC, which obviously Access TV and LFA and those type of organizations are RFA. It was RFA before. Obviously, they're feeders to the UFC. So, I mean, those are always some pretty solid resumes before they enter the UFC because the competition level is not too bad. But I wasn't even overly impressed with Johnson, on some of those RFA shows either. So Johnson is good. Obviously, his wrestling is his strength, and he utilized that well. His stand-up game is improving. Like I said, he's going to have a little bit of reach over Milstead. But if he can't get this fight to the ground, I think Milstead's going to have his moments throughout this fight. Now, I'm not going to pick Milstead because he has to prove to me that he can keep the fight upright and have success on the feet against a guy like Johnson or any stud wrestler that he faces. So it's hard for me to pick against Johnson in this spot, so I'm going to pick him because I think his wrestling probably is a difference in this spot. But I think the line right now where it's at 3-1 is a litlittle bit too high, and I think Milstead, like I said, if he can keep the fight upright, he'll probably make it an interesting fight to say the least. So hopefully this is a good scrap, and Milstead kind of has a good showing at 205. Like to get more, competition in that weight class for sure, because I think that's one of the weaker weight classes, obviously, in the UFC right now. So both these guys, if they can have a good performance, they can kind of work their way up the ladder and keep on improving. That'd be good to see. But my pick is going to be Johnson to win here.
Johnson comes from a pretty solid wrestling base, and he showcased that very well in his UFC debut. His last fight against Fortuna, it wasn't quite as impressive. I mean, he had a lot more trouble getting Fortuna to the ground, and in a stand-up fight, Fortuna actually had some success against him. Like, it hurt him a little bit in the second round, ended up making that a pretty close decision. Johnson eked it out, but it was not like a one-sided type of fight. Milstead, on the other hand, after, probably working too hard to get the win in his UFC debut, he got absolutely destroyed by Curtis Blades in his second fight. I mean, he just got ragdolled in that fight. I mean, he must have got taken down about 6 or 7 times before his knee just kind of exploded and forced an injury TKO. I mean, he had no chance in that fight. I mean, Curtis Blades was just way too big and too strong and was just throwing him all over the place. So that's the reason he's dropping down. He was an undersized heavyweight coming in at about 230 pounds. And so now he'll be back to being, you know, the average light heavyweight. So he's not going to be dominated in size. He's actually an inch taller than Jordan Johnson. So I think he'll be competitive at this weight class. Milstead is pretty athletic. He comes from a football background. He had a little bit of wrestling, but he does prefer to stand and trade. I would say on the feet, he has power and some volume, but he doesn't have very good striking defense. He attacks everything with a bit of a straight line. He does throw in combination, but I mean, he leaves his chin out there. So if Johnson can sit down on his punches and counter effectively, I think that the opportunities are going to be there. And even though Milstead does come from the wrestling background, if Johnson has been working on his wrestling, I mean, the opportunities are going to be there. I mean, Milstead really did not look like he could stop the takedowns from the bigger, stronger Blades. And while I think that he'll be a little bit more effective this time around, dropping down a weight class, Johnson's wrestling is pretty good, and I think that he should have the edge there too. So I'm leaning Johnson, but I mean, Milstead could surprise him, and I think Johnson might be a little bit overrated in the division as a prospect, but this could be a way for him to prove himself to me a little bit. But so my pick is Johnson, but I'm not crazy confident. Now dropping down to the bantamweight division, we have Brian Caraway, who is 21-8, taking on Cody Stamann, who is 16-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Stamann -120, Caraway -20, exactly a pick'em fight. It opened up offshore, and right now, looking over a sponsored sportsbook, BetDSI, it is currently Stamann at -160, I'm sorry. DSI has -160 on Stamann. The comeback on Caraway at +130. So obviously more action coming in Stamann's way from the bettors out there. He's been pretty impressive. I mean, he coming off of a big win over a hyped prospect, of course. We know that, Stamann has that wrestling background. He's got good stand-up as well. I mean, training in Detroit with Cruikshank and crew out there. So he's becoming quite a fighter at 135 pounds, that's for sure, because he's got such a well-rounded game, and he's got that powerful wrestler frame. He's got the speed. He's got a lot of stuff you like to see. So matching him up with Caraway is a really good idea, I think, from the UFC's perspective, because you got a guy in Caraway that's been out for a while, but man, before Caraway was actually on this little hiatus, which was basically he's been out since May of 2016, his win over Sterling. So he's been out a while. And of course, injuries, his personal life with Miesha Tate, I'm not sure what's going on there, but obviously they broke up. So there's some question marks surrounding Caraway. And if Stamann could come in here and pick him off, I think he has a really solid win under his resume. Because like I said, if you look back recently at what Caraway was able to accomplish before he went on his little hiatus here. I mean, the win over Sterling, granted, Sterling's, cardio at times will let him down, and Caraway took opportunity, and got a close decision win over that. But his win over an aging Wineland, the Assunção fight that he lost for Caraway was actually really competitive, far more competitive than most of us thought it'd be. That's for sure. And then again, Eric Perez is not an easy out as well. So he put together a nice run. His confidence, Caraway's confidence and his mental game, I think improved quite a bit, along with this stand-up game. We always know that Caraway is dangerous on the ground. His wrestling is a little bit underrated, and his grappling and submission game is, man, it's on par. I mean, he gets your back. You can forget about it. He probably is going to sub you out. So you got to be careful with a guy like Caraway for sure. But stylistically, this should be a tough matchup because Stamann, again, wrestler, he should be able to keep the fight upright. And if he does, he should have the edge over Caraway with his stand-up game and outstrike Caraway a little bit, especially with the time off. I mean, with everything kind of coming to the table here, you have to lean a little bit towards Stamann. I'm going to pick him to win. But man, I wouldn't be surprised if Caraway shows any life like he was before his hiatus, like I said, before he took this time off. I think Caraway is going to make this a fight, and it's definitely a dog or pass situation. So where the price is now, I wouldn't lay it. I mean, I think, like I said, this is kind of a big test for Stamann, and Caraway is a very solid veteran. He's faced great competition. He knows what he's capable of, and he knows to win this fight, he has to grapple with Stamann a little bit and probably take his back or something of that nature. And all it takes is one mistake, and Caraway can take advantage. So it's a dog or pass situation, in my opinion. But as far as a pure pick goes, and the stylistical matchup we have here, it's got to be Stamann. So I'm going to pick Stamann to win.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors here on why I think Stamen has a pretty good shot. I mean, he's athletic. He's younger than Brian Caraway. I mean, Caraway's 33 years old now and he's had a bit more wear and tear. And at the lighter weight classes, it's tough to be even in your early mid-30s. Stamen, I would say, has the slightly better wrestling, although I would favor Caraway's submissions and overall grappling. Stamen has very good conditioning, and Caraway has kind of taken advantage of some guys fading in the past, like most recently that Sterling fight where Sterling was crushing him in the first round and then really slowed down, and Caraway was able to turn the tides on him. So, and then in the stand-up, I would say Caraway's stand-up is a bit underrated. I mean, he did win a stand-up fight against Eddie Wineland, and he was competitive with a Sun Tzu, but I think Stamen is very aggressive, and he's able to walk through some things, and I don't think that he'll have a lot of respect for Caraway's striking. And Stamen does throw more, so that could also factor things in. And then you gotta throw in some intangibles. I mean, Caraway's not dating Miesha Tate anymore. He hasn't fought in 2 years. He has, had repeatedly getting called out by guys and getting made fun of, and now Miesha Tate's like pregnant or something. And I mean, it's not a good time to be Brian Caraway. And I think, Cody Stamen's getting him at the perfect time. And I mean, they're burying this fight on the Fight Pass prelims, even though Caraway's ranked number 7. So, I mean, it just doesn't make sense, and it's kind of silly, and I think, Cody Stamen can pull this one out for sure. I mean, as long as he doesn't get submitted, and as long as Caraway isn't able to out-grapple Stamen and win like 2 rounds, then I think, Stamen can take this fight. I don't know if he can finish him. He probably can't, but I think Stamen can do enough to win a decision. So he's gonna be my pick. Next up, we have the headlining bout of the Fight Pass prelims in the welterweight division. Mike Pyle is having his retirement fight. He is 27-13-1, taking on Zach Otto, who is 15-5. Now, Nick, where was this fight opened, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Otto minus 245, Pyle plus 175. And right now, looking over at DSI, it is currently Otto minus 300, the comeback on Pyle at plus 240. So a little bit more action coming in Otto's way. Not hard to believe. I mean, Pyle's 42 years old. He's had a long MMA career, plenty of fights in the UFC. He's kind of had a roller coaster ride up and down. I mean, the guy has some skill everywhere. The guy has some underrated wrestling. He's proven that inside the cage, inside the octagon. I mean, several times as well. He's got a great ground game. I mean, he's so slick with the submission ability. It's unbelievable. And he also has a pretty good clinch game, and he's got some knockout power to go along with it. I mean, he's landed some nice knees, some timely knees along the way in his career. Just everything. And another guy that kind of with age, I think mentally got everything figured out. And despite, him getting a little bit older, he actually, I think, was peaking late in his career overall. He kind of, got himself to the point where he wanted to be in the UFC and again, a roller coaster ride because at times he was a little bit too inconsistent for my liking, honestly, but he does have the ability. He does have the skill. Now, this is his last fight against Otto. Otto is a tough opponent. It's not going to be an easy fight for Pyle either. I think Otto matches up fairly well. If Pyle can't get Otto to the floor and kind of outwork him on the ground a little bit or make life miserable on the ground for him, I think that Otto, obviously, I do, even though he's coming off of a knockout loss, I still trust Otto's chin a little bit more than I do Pyle at this point. So I think if they say striking, even though Pyle is dangerous, I think Otto outpoints Pyle and has a capability of possibly finishing Pyle on the feet as well. So I'm going to pick Otto here. It's just hard to pick Pyle at this stage of his career, even though he has showed up at times and he's looked okay and he's pulled off some upsets along the way. I just think that Otto, even though he's not at the top of the food chain when it comes to welterweights, I still think in this matchup he'll be okay, and I think that he'll have his success on the feet, like I said, more than anything else against Pyle, and I think he does end up clipping that chin along the way. So we'll see how it plays out. Not a confident pick either way, because again, Pyle is definitely the more talented fighter, but I have to still side with Otto here at this point.
I can totally see Mike Pyle pulling this out, because Zach Otto isn't a huge threat. Like, he's more of a grinder. I mean, his first 2 wins in the UFC were split decisions against lower tier competition. And then he got, just completely destroyed by Li Jinglong. So, Mike Pyle could pull this off. I mean, if he can crack Otto with his hands, Pyle does have some power. Pyle does have decent wrestling, not amazing, and he does pretty good grappling. So there are paths to victory for Pyle, but I mean, the biggest issue with Pyle is the fact that he's 42 years old and he gets knocked out violently way too often. I mean, his last 2 fights, he got knocked out. I mean, the Alex Garcia knockout was just brutal. And then you go back, Matt Brown knocked him out, Jordan Meehan knocked him out, Rory McDonald knocked him out, Jake Ellenberger knocked him out. I mean, it's just not good. So I think that even though Otto doesn't have that much power and he's not that dangerous, and this is a decent way to go out, I think Otto probably can knock him out. I just don't know if Pyle has the speed or reflexes or elusivity to get out of the way. And Otto probably bounces back here and either wins a decision or maybe knocks Pyle out. So my pick's going to be Zach Otto. Now moving up to the middleweight division for the first bout on the FS1 prelims, we have CB Dalloway, who is 17-9, taking on Hector Lombard, who is 34-8-1 with 2 no contests. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Open exactly a pick 'em offshore. -120 either way. Lombard -120, Dalloway -120. Right now, it's staying fairly close to a pick 'em. Not a bad number out there. -133 over at BetDSI. The comeback on Dalloway is +103. So a little bit more actually coming in Lombard's way. And I'll tell you what, if this was in their primes, there's no doubt. I mean, Lombard should be a bigger favorite than he is currently, but he's not in his prime. That's the situation that we're dealing with here. And talk about chins. I mean, at this point, again, Lombard actually had a granite chin at one point, but now as he's aging, he's 40 years old. His chin's letting him down. His conditioning's letting him down even more so. And that's always been a little bit of an issue for Lombard, obviously, throughout his career as well. But man, talk about a short, explosive fighter that has skill on the ground. He's got that judo background. He can ragdoll people. I mean, I know he dropped down to 170 and that wasn't, he had his moments. He had some success at 170, but it didn't end up working out too well for him with the weight cut and everything. And especially as he's aging now, he's back up to 185. He just passed his prime. That's all there is to it here. That's why Dalloway has a legit shot to win this fight as well. Now, Dalloway, don't get me wrong, the guy's a talented fighter in his own right. I mean, he's probably underrated and underrespected often, but the truth is here, again, in his prime, Lombard will probably knock him out and catch that chin. Dalloway has a suspect chin. That's what you got to be concerned about, and that's what you still have to be concerned about here. Because Dalloway's, when it comes to pure skill, he's okay on the feet. He's got some length, obviously. He's got a little bit of power to go along with it. But defensively, it is a concern. And again, against good strikers with power, you have to be worried about that because he get clipped and put out. But his complete overall game is what's impressive with Dalloway because he does have some outstanding wrestling. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, again, this is not factual, but it seems like he's taken almost everybody down that he's been up against in the octagon throughout his career. So that's the kind of wrestling and grappling pedigree that Dalloway has. I mean, it's underrated, like I said, more so than not. So I think Dalloway actually, if he can survive round one, he probably does have that kind of success even against Lombard. Lombard's not the easiest guy to take down, but he hasn't been put on his back against good wrestlers. So I would suspect Dalloway want to kind of stay on the outside a little bit, utilize that reach and try to take this thing in deep waters. And if he can, then obviously he's going to have more success as the fight progresses a little bit. So to me, I know that Dalloway hasn't been as consistent. He hasn't been fighting a lot. He's been out since July of 2017, his win over Herman, but I still think there's maybe a little bit more left in the tank for Dalloway. And with his size advantage and with how he's probably going to approach his fight, I think you got to kind of lean Dalloway in this spot. And again, I mean, in earlier times, there's no way I'd pick Dalloway over Lombard, but this isn't earlier times. This is 2018. Lombard's 40 years old. I mean, it is what it is. So I'm going to pick Dalloway. Not a confident pick. You can't be too confident here because one punch can end either way. I mean, like I said, both these guys are a bit chinny, but I still think that Dalloway, if he can sustain the fight and keep it going to deeper waters in round 2, round 3, he probably wins the fight. So I'll go Dalloway here.
And I agree. I mean, Hector Lombard's lost 4 straight. He's been knocked out in 3 of those 4. And Dalloway has actually looked pretty decent. I mean, I know that, he got knocked out after a really great stretch run that he had, but, and he, lost a few fights in a row, but, I thought he looked decent in that fight against Ed Herman. And, now that he's fighting Lombard, basically he just has to avoid the early blitz. I mean, Hector Lombard is not that dangerous of a fighter the more it goes on. And, Dalloway's gonna have 5 inches in reach, 5 inches in height. If he just stays away from Lombard early, doesn't allow Lombard to explode in and crack him with something nasty, then Dalloway's gonna have the stand-up available as Lombard's pace slows down and he basically just stands there waiting to get hit, or the takedowns potentially could be open. We've seen Lombard taken down, and Dalloway has very good wrestling. So as long as he doesn't dive in face first into a knee or an uppercut, then I think Dalloway can get the wrestling going, and I think Dalloway could get the striking going. I think his striking isn't that bad. And his defense actually has gotten better. I mean, he got put in there against some guys that were able to crack him a little bit on the chin, and he lost some tough fights, but I think that this is a good bounce back opportunity. I mean, I know it sucks that Lombard's viewed as a bounce back opportunity these days, but I mean, come on. I mean, he lost to Johnny Hendricks at middleweight. So, I mean, what more can you say? So my pick's going to be CB Dalloway. I'm nervous about the early goings of the fight, but I think that he should pull this out. Now, dropping down to bantamweight, we have John Dodson, who is 20-9, taking on Pedro Munoz, who is 15-2 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Dodson opens minus 180. The comeback on Munoz at plus 140. And now looking over at betdsi.com.eu, it is currently Dodson minus 170, the comeback plus 140. So line margins have tightened up a little bit. There is 2-way action coming in this fight as well. Obviously, this fight was supposed to take place not too long ago, and it got postponed, moved because Munoz wasn't able to make weight. And with the weight difference, Dodson decided not to take the fight, so they rebooked it. That line closed a little bit higher at that point, especially after Munoz missed weight. The Dodson line kind of got steamed a little bit. So it's kind of where it was, almost where it got steamed. I think it's a little bit too high, honestly. This is going to be a good fight. I mean, Dodson is an explosive guy. We know what kind of speed and power he has. He's hard to take down. He's just a tough out. Doesn't matter if it's flyweight, if it's bantamweight. You would think he's small for this weight class, but I mean, he can hang in there with the best of them. That's for sure. I mean, Dodson, shoot, he's knocked out TJ Dillashaw. I mean, way back when now, of course, but I mean, that's the kind of power that he has, even at bantamweight. So Dodson is a threat always. And again, with the skill, the coaching he has behind him, with all that experience, he's definitely a tough out. But stylistically here against Munoz, it's going to be a tough fight because I don't think Dodson's going to want to play the ground game here. He's not going to want to go for takedowns. It's kind of not really his style of fighting anyway in most cases. So I think it stays upright. Now Munoz is going to have a little bit of height on him, I believe 3 inches, but the pure reach advantage actually goes to Dodson, which is interesting here. But I still think Munoz, his striking, he keeps a little bit of a busier pace. He's a little bit more steady. He mixes things up a little bit better. So I think the striking, Dodson's going to be maybe landing the more precise, harder shots, but I think Munoz is going to be a little bit more active and he's going to be throwing a little bit more often as well. And he might be, looking to take Dodson to the ground, clinch up with him a little bit and just kind of outsize him and try to outmuscle him a little bit if that's possible. So Dodson's speed again could be an issue here though. It's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. Both these guys are pretty fast, but I think Dodson obviously has a little bit edge there. So I think this is a kind of a coin flip type of fight, honestly, back and forth. Now if Dodson, he's a hard guy to submit. He's never been submitted throughout his career and he's faced so many, good high level fighters that's pretty impressive to not get caught. So it's not an easy task to submit somebody like Dodson. Those of you guys out there that think, oh, Munoz can submit him, I'm waiting for him, to get around his neck. It's not going to be that easy. So I think more so than anything, Munoz is going to have to outpoint him to win this fight, which is not going to be easy either, but I think he's capable of doing so. So for me, again, it's a kind of a coin flip type of fight. I think the activity level of Munoz is going to be the difference. I expect to see a split decision type of fight when it hits the scorecards, if that's the case. So I'm going to side with Munoz. Again, it's probably an unpopular type of decision out there because pick out there because a lot of you guys seem to be betting Dodson and thinking that he's going to win this fight confidently. I don't think that's the case. I think again, split decision type of fight. I'm going to go with Munoz. It's a dog or pass situation for sure, especially with these numbers. So that's the way I'm going to go. We'll see how it plays out. Hopefully it's a good fight.
It definitely should be a good fight. Dodson and Munoz are a unique stylistic matchup. I mean, we've talked about this fight before. I thought Munoz would outwork Dodson last time. Dodson has the explosiveness and the one-punch power, but I think Munoz has the volume. Both guys are pretty good defensively. Both guys have about the same accuracy. Just Munoz is a little bit more voluminous with his striking. Munoz definitely has the better ground game, but is it going to go to the ground? Probably not. I think Dodson wants to keep it upright and look for that kill shot, but Munoz has a pretty good chin. And the only guy that's hurt him so far was Jimmy Rivera, and that was a hell of a firefight between Munoz and Rivera if you haven't seen that one. And I think that this fight can be kind of like the Marlon Moraes John Dodson fight where, both guys are kind of looking for their spots, but maybe Munoz does just enough to outpoint Dodson, and this could be like a split decision type fight. So I think it's competitive, but I favor Munoz. I think Dodson is still a bit undersized at bantamweight and against some guys that could never make flyweight. I think that he's always going to be at a bit of a disadvantage, and Munoz definitely could never make flyweight because he has trouble making bantamweight. So, unless Munoz has a horrific weight cut again, I think that he should pull this out. Now, moving up to the lightweight division, we have Beneil Dariush, who is 14-3-1, taking on Alexander Hernandez, who is 8-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Dariush open minus 350, the comeback on Hernandez at plus 250. Now we're seeing Dariush at minus 400 over at betdsi.eu and the comeback on Hernandez at plus 310. So a little bit more action coming Dariush's way. Not really that surprised. Hernandez is taking this fight on short notice, and Dariush is absolutely one of the best lightweights in the world. There's no doubt about that with his skill set, with the competition level that he's faced inside the octagon, and with his performances overall. Now, that being said, I am a little concerned for him though, because I think Dariush has that kind of skill to actually wear that strap around his waist at one time, or one day, but he has to get more consistent. He has to get his cardio in check a little bit more. He's got to tighten up that defense on the feet as well, because he's a little bit chinny to go along with it. So if he starts gassing, he starts, not keeping his foot on the gas, and he exposes that chin, that's the concern for sure with Dariush. Now in his last fight, he had a kind of a disappointing performance over Dunham. Now, Dunham has always been one of the most underrated, lightweights in the game, that's for sure. He's such a tough out. With his experience, with his ability as well. So it's not ever an easy fight going up against a guy like Dunham. But at this stage in their careers, with Dunham's age and at the point where he's at right now, Dariush should have kind of ran through him a little bit. That's what we were all expecting to see, and he didn't. So it was a close fight. It ended up being a draw. That's a little bit of a head scratcher. And before that, his loss to Edson Barboza for Dariush, it's, he got caught. It happens, but again, his chin and his defense has let him down before as well, so it's not really a huge surprise. And sometimes his decision making is kind of questionable as well. So I like Dariush. He's made me cash in the past as well. with his skill set, he's a tough out, like I said, but I'll tell you what, where it is right now, 4-1, even against a debuting guy like Hernandez, it's tough to lay that chalk against Hernandez. Because if you look at Hernandez a little bit deeper, the guy's a wrestler. He's got good striking. He's a solid grappler as well. Mentally, if you look at some of the interviews that he's put out so far since he's taken his fight, he's confident. He seems mentally stable. He seems like he's not intimidated at all, coming in and facing a higher level lightweight in the UFC. And to make a side note, he was already training for another fight when he got the call as well. So his conditioning should actually be okay. So in typical circumstances, Hernandez is actually a pretty solid lightweight that could come in here in a very deep weight class, as we all know, and actually pull off a lot of wins because his style. Again, Hernandez has a really good wrestling background. If he wants to get you to the floor, in most cases, he can. He doesn't have to do that though, because his stand-up game, he's got speed, he's got some power on the feet, he's got that killer instinct as well. So there's a lot to like about Hernandez. And with all that being said, I think the line is too high. And it's hard to pick against Dariush here, though, because, again, all the level of competition he's faced in this spot for Hernandez coming in here, I think he is confident. But still, the first time you're debuting in the UFC on short notice against a savvy vet at this point like Dariush that's competed against the best, still kind of tough to win fights like this. So I'm going to pick Dariush to win. But again, it's a dog or pass situation despite the short notice take and despite the stylistical matchup here, because these guys are going to be pretty competitive, I think, back and forth. Now, Dariush is going to have a little bit of size over Hernandez, and we'll see how he matches up overall with him, because, like I said, I think Hernandez can actually hang with Dariush punch for punch and maybe wrestling for wrestling. We'll see how it goes, because Dariush, again, has been one of those guys that's for a while has overperformed, but he has to get consistent and has to tighten up that D. And again, his conditioning has been a little bit suspect as well. So some question marks surrounding Dariush, to say the least, but it's hard not to pick him in this spot. So I will pick him. But if you guys are looking to throw him in parlays and think he's a guaranteed win here, take it easy, take a step back, and respect Hernandez's ability as well, because I think the guy has some skill. And even if he loses this fight, he is going to win some fights in the lightweight division. So the pick is Dariush, but just be cautious out there if you're betting this fight.
Yeah, I'm going to side with Dariush as well, mainly because of the short notice UFC debut situation, which very, very rarely sides with the UFC debuter, especially against a ranked opponent. But Dariush could be vulnerable. I mean, he got knocked out by Edson Barboza. Then he had a disappointing draw against Evan Dunham. And then now he's taking on somebody that he wasn't even preparing for, because Hernandez stepped in for Bobby Green about 2 weeks ago. And Hernandez was preparing for a fight, so it's not like he's only in training camp for 2 weeks. So I think this fight could be competitive. I expect Hernandez to give Dariush a better fight than people expect or anticipate. Hernandez comes from a pretty strong wrestling background. So wrestling and takedowns are the name of his game, which probably plays into Dariush's style. I mean, when guys try to take Dariush down, I mean, he usually can just wrap them up and put them in a submission, and then they're in big trouble. But Hernandez also on the feet, while he's not a world beater in the stand-up, I mean, he's competent there, and he has a little bit of pop in his hand. So Dariush, with some of the chin issues he's had in the past, could be vulnerable. Dariush also, though, does have power himself and has, racked up some pretty impressive striking performances inside the octagon. So I wouldn't count out Dariush at all in any facet of this game, of this fight, but I just don't want people to underestimate Hernandez. I think that even though I'm going to pick Dariush to win this fight, I think Hernandez actually could have a decent run in the octagon once they give him a full training camp and prepare to take on maybe a lower level guy and build his way up. So against a top 15 guy on his short notice debut, I'm not going to pick Hernandez, but who knows? Maybe these guys face each other down the line again. Hernandez might be able to pull it out, but for now, I'm definitely going to pick Beneil Dariush. Now, closing out the preliminary card, we have a women's strawweight contest between Ashley Yoder, who is 5-3, and the UFC debut of Mackenzie Dern, who is 5-0. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Dern opened minus 475, the comeback on Yoder plus 325. Early action took the line down a little bit, but now we're seeing Dern back up right now over at betdsi.eu. It's minus 425 for Dern. The comeback on Yoder is plus 325. So line margins have tightened up. And again, there has been two-way action in this fight. I think a lot of people are still thinking, Mackenzie Dern, her background, a BJJ chick, she's pretty good at what she does, but this is MMA. She's going to have a lot to learn. But I'll tell you what, she has looked great. She's like a sponge. She's training with the MMA lab, which is a great camp. And again, I just kind of hinted with her grappling background. Mackenzie Dern, for those of you guys that don't know, is one of the best female grapplers of all time. She has such an amazing talent. On the ground, it's unbelievable. So she's one of the best all-time ground fighters. She's making her transition to MMA now. She's fought again on some of those Access TV cards in the past, and she's had some success. And if you watch her fight by fight, especially early on, she didn't look too great. Even on the ground, she got her opponents on the ground, and she wasn't able to finish some of those fights. If you look back at some of her legacy fights or whatnot, so that was a bit of a surprise. But you look at her progression. Like I said, from Legacy to LFA to Invicta, and you could see her getting better. You could see her getting more confident. It's not just the ground. It's Mackenzie Dern's stand-up game that's improved. She's not afraid to go out there and throw some punches. Her technique is actually getting cleaner fight by fight as well. She's got some power on the feet as well. And then if she gets her opponent to the ground, hey, that's even better for her. Obviously, she has a huge advantage over most fighters. So Dern is a very complete fighter. And the scary thing is she's only 24 years old. She's getting better fight by fight. She's getting more confidence fight by fight. She's ready for this stage, and she's going to run through this division and get herself in position for a title shot, I think, sooner than a lot of people realize here at 115 pounds. So you've got to watch out for Mackenzie Dern. And she's facing a respectable opponent in Ashley Yoder. Yoder's been around for a while. Obviously, she's an Ultimate Fighter vet as well. She has a heck of a ground game. I mean, that's what kind of is her best strength as well. So you have grappler versus grappler going at it here. Yoder has a little bit of a stand-up game as well, but I think she's going to get bullied here by Mackenzie Dern, honestly. I think Dern's going to be pushing the pace. She's going to have a little bit disadvantage, Dern will, as far as pure reach, because Yoder is going to be the taller fighter. She's going to have, I believe, 6 inches in actual reach there, but I don't think it's going to matter to Dern. I think she's going to close that gap, get inside. She's going to have her way with Yoder. She's going to be landing the harder punches. She's going to be the bully here in this fight. And I think if it does hit the ground, obviously Dern has a bigger edge, even though Yoder is pretty solid on the ground, and you got to watch out for her submission game. In this situation, Dern is going to be too much. I think her defense is going to be too good for her to get caught up in anything, and I think her offense is going to be a little bit too much for Yoder, and I wouldn't be surprised if Dern finishes Yoder on the ground. But if she doesn't, she's going to win the scorecards as well. So it is what it is. I think this is a great matchup for Dern. I'm glad the UFC signed her and brought her in because, like I said, she can actually, if they match her right, she can continue to progress her career the right way, and by the time she's ready for that title shot, she's going to be a handful, and she'll probably be capable of possibly winning that sucker. So we'll see how it all plays out, and we'll see what kind of career Dern has. But the hype behind Dern seems legit to me, honestly. I think sky's the limit for her. So it starts here with Yoder and see how it goes. But the pick is Dern. There's no question about it. I don't think it's a dog or pass situation at all. I think, honestly, even at minus 425, there's probably some value still at Mackenzie Dern. So how often do you guys hear me say that? But that's just the situation here. So Dern's the pick.
Yeah, Mackenzie Dern is an elite grappler that has added a little bit of striking to her game. In some of her fights recently, I mean, she was actually hurting girls on the feet. So as long as she doesn't fall in love with her hands and ignore her spectacular grappling, then I think that she could go a long way. I mean, still just 24 years old. This isn't somebody that, got tired of or, couldn't hang with the new kids on the block in grappling and decided to move to MMA. This is somebody that is in their, not even in their physical prime yet and switched over and tested out MMA. Dern can submit Yoder. She could knock out Yoder or drop her on the feet. She could pick up a TKO from ground and pound. I think that this is a great matchup for her. Yoder really does not present a threat anywhere. Like, she's kind of just okay at everything. She doesn't have much power. She doesn't have good enough grappling ability to hang with Dern. So, unless Yoder can just jab and use her reach over the course of 3 rounds and try to outpoint Dern, then, she is clearly going to lose this fight. So, I'm just not going to waste too much more time on it. Dern's a great prospect, and I think that she has a bright future as long as the UFC doesn't throw her in there against top contenders right away. As long as they build her up properly and let her continue to develop her game, she has a very promising UFC career in front of her. So my pick's going to be Mackenzie Dern. Now, kicking off the pay-per-view main card, we have a women's bantamweight contest between Kat Zingano, who is 9-2, and Ketlin Vieira, who is 9-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Vieira open minus 180 to come back on Zingano plus 140 right now, looking over at BetDSI. It's currently Vieira minus 170 to come back on Zingano plus 140. So opener seems pretty good to me, honestly. I think it's a good spot. It's fair. I think Vieira, I mean, considering the star power that Zingano has and the popularity she has, Vieira deserves to be a solid favorite here. Maybe even slightly higher. And that's saying a lot because Zingano definitely has some skill. She's been in there with some great competition, as we all know. I mean, the Rousey loss was kind of a bit of a surprise how easy Rousey was to be able to finish her there, of course. I mean, that's always going to be kind of a head scratcher. But that being said, I think this fight's going to be a little bit closer to the Pena fight for her than anything else. So Zingano is more of a front runner. She's always been that way. She's aggressive. She's powerful. She's capable, obviously, of doing some really good things on the ground or on the feet as well. So she's a well-rounded fighter. I just think here against Vieira, she's up against the wall. I mean, I don't think an area that she's going to be a lot better than Vieira at. It's going to be close in some some ways, but I think Vieira is going to be actually the better wrestler. She's going to get top position as the fight progresses. Again, I could see it kind of following the same blueprint as the Pena fight a little bit. Zingano was able to have success early in that fight. But as the fight progressed, Pena took it over. And I think that's going to be the same thing here. Zingano has a little bit of speed. She's going to be dangerous coming in with her aggression and her power, of course, but Vieira, I think, is going to be able to weather that storm. I think Vieira's boxing is actually getting better. And that's another thing that, I got to point out here. She's only 26 years old. She's gaining confidence. Her win over Sarah McMahon is a very solid win. So she got herself to a level right now where she's only going to get better. And again, I mean, she's coming from a good camp, obviously. She's got a really good grappling background to go along with outstanding judo and wrestling and takedowns. She's got her boxing, I think, is going to be a problem for Zingano as the fight progresses as well. If Vieira decides to put her foot on the gas and lets those hands go a little bit, I think she could do some damage. So I just don't see too many paths to victory here for Zingano, especially as the fight progresses. Another problem I have with Zingano is also she's been out for almost 2 years. And if you look back at her resume, I mean, she's been fighting an average of less than one fight per year recently. So she has to be more consistent. She has to get that cardio in check because she's got to have to put her foot on the gas for 3 straight rounds to beat some of these top tier ladies, honestly. And I'm not sure if Zingano can do that. And just imagine if it's a 5-round type of fight, then she's going to have, suffer even more in cases like that. So I think Zingano needs to get back on track here, win or lose, and be a little bit more consistent and get a little bit more activity going. So that's the way she improves and that's the way she makes an eventual run. But for right now, I think Vieira's just going to be too much for her. I think Vieira pretty much beats her in every area of the game. So Vieira is the pick, and I don't think it's a dog or pass situation. I think it's more of a favorite or pass situation, honestly.
And I completely agree. I mean, Kat Zingano is a good athlete. She's violent. She has some power, but she's not that great of a striker. She does have good knees in the clinch, but I mean, that's where she beat Miesha Tate. But for the most part, she's really only dangerous if she can get top position on the ground. And as long as Ketlen Vieira can avoid that situation, or even if it goes to the ground and she is on bottom, I think Vieira can still threaten Kat Zingano. Because Vieira has a very strong ground game and grappling is her strong suit, and she's only getting better every day. And you got to remember, Ketlen Vieira is 26 years old. Kat Zingano hasn't fought in 2 years. She's coming off of 2 losses, and she's 35. So, even though I know Kat Zingano is a good athlete, she's posted a whole bunch of training videos and stuff showing a lot of her physical prowess on Instagram and Twitter and everything. But you know what? I'd prefer much more the silent type that just goes about their business and just keeps getting results. And that's what Ketlen Vieira has been doing. She is getting better every time we see her. I think her stand-up will continue to get better. I mean, it's still not that good, but she probably should be able to hold her own in the stand-up against Zingano. And when it goes to the ground, while Zingano might be the better wrestler, Vieira is definitely the more technical grappler. And I just think Vieira is going to win scrambles and put Zingano in some bad situations. And I think Vieira might be able to get the tap, but she should at least be able to get the decision victory. And she could be knocking on the door for a title shot if she gets to 10-0. So my pick's going to be Ketlen Vieira as well. Now moving up to the heavyweight division, we have Stefan Struve, who is 32-9, taking on Andrei Arlovsky, who is 26-15 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Struve opened minus 380. The comeback on Arlovsky at plus 290. 380 for Struve. Plus, again, I'm just going to mention it again, plus 290 for Arlovsky. Right now over at BetDSI, it's all the way down to minus 175. The comeback on Arlovsky at plus 145. So needless to say where the action went on this fight. I mean, look, I get it. I don't trust Arlovsky's chin either. I mean, he's been around for a long time, and it's not like it's going to get any better, even though Arlovsky has surprisingly had some okay performances as of late. He's surprising me because, again, Albini, I was expecting to actually knock him out, and he survived that fight. And actually, he did pretty well. He won that fight, and he deserved to win that fight. So that's kind of a win for him. And even before that, his fight with Tabura, I mean, again, Tabura is not like a one-punch crazy knockout power type of guy, but still, I was expecting him to even have more problems there, even though he lost that fight. So it is what it is with Arlovski. I mean, he's 39 years old. He's always been chinny. You got to respect the late run that he made in his UFC career to the point where the UFC actually uses this guy as a gatekeeper to get a title shot. I mean, a lot of these guys, Stipe and Ngannou, a lot of these guys that got that, the newer guys, the new breed of heavyweights that have come in have had to go through Arlovski to get that title shot. So that's exactly what they're using him for. Now, Struve has been around for a long time. We all know that as well. He's a heck of a fighter, a talented fighter, is constantly growing, it seems still. I mean, the guy's like 7 foot tall, but he's filling out. He's getting a little bit stronger. Obviously, he's getting a little bit more comfortable, in his body and the way he is able to perform and with his striking ability and that length that he uses. I mean, the guy is a well-rounded fighter. He's got an underrated submission game and he's got some skill on the feet as well. He's going to have a big reach advantage over Arlovski in this spot. But what's the problem in most cases with Struve? It's definitely that chin. I mean, he's hittable. He's got that tall man defense, and if you got a lot of power, you could clip that chin and possibly put him out. Arlovski does still have that old man strength he's got that kind of precision striking that he could catch Struve's chin. So that's why everybody's coming in, especially based on his last performance. They think Arlovski probably has a little bit left in the tank, and if he catches Struve in that chin, he could put him out. So plus 290, that was a ridiculous line, to be honest with you. And that's why everybody took advantage. I think it's a lot more fair where it's at now. So I agree with it. I think that Struve does have a slight advantage in this fight. I trust him a little bit more at this point of his career. And I think he probably does beat Arlovski here, whether it does hit the scorecards or before that. I think Struve has a legit shot to actually knock Arlovski out as well. So can't trust either guy's chin. Certainly wouldn't lay the chalk here against Arlovski in this spot, but it's hard not to pick Struve in this spot either. So not loving the dog here. I mean, if I got plus 290, I sure would. But where it's at right now, I think I'm going to pick Struve, and it's a tough fight to bet, honestly. So that's where we'll go with it.
The only reason this fight's so tough to pick is because neither guy has a very good chin. I mean, Andrei Arlovski's 39 years old. He's been knocked out a ton of times, but he's actually coming off a decent performance against a dangerous guy in Junior Albini. Stefan Struve just turned 30. And he's coming off of a TKO loss to Alexander Volkov. So, you would think they're going in opposite directions, but actually Struve was fighting pretty well before that, and Arlovski was on a horrific losing streak before that. So, I still think that Struve has a little bit more left in the tank. I know that he's had his issues with his chin, with his heart, all kinds of stuff, but I mean, he finally is a guy that actually has to cut a decent amount of weight to make 265. I was always waiting for that moment because when he was, 7 feet tall, 6'11" or whatever, and coming in at 220, I always thought that was ridiculous. But, he's finally added a little bit of size and strength and power to his frame. And as long as he can fight long and chip away at Arlovski, there's gonna be an opening. And I think that he does knock Arlovski out at some point. I mean, clearly Arlovski can knock Struve out too. They both have power. They both have suspect chins, but I think Struve gets back on track and lands a good shot on Arlovski and eventually puts him out at some point over the course of 3 rounds. So my pick's going to be Struve. Next up, we drop down to the bantamweight division for Sean O'Malley, who is 9-0, taking on Andrei Sukumtat, who is 12-5. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
O'Malley opened minus 260, Sukumtat plus 180. That's not a mistake. Minus 260 plus 180. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, it's Sukumtat the favorite. The line flipped. He is now minus 145. The comeback on O'Malley at plus 115. So I was talking about the last line being a head scratcher and not a good spot to open up at. And now this is another one. I mean, O'Malley minus 260 over Sukumtat's ridiculous. So those people that came in and gobbled up that plus 180 and then flipped the line along the way, congrats to you, because I think there was some really good value at Sukumtat at that price. There's no doubt. This is going to be a competitive fight. But with all that said, I do think O'Malley could be favored in this fight. I mean, and especially going back through it. My first initial take on this fight was honestly, oh man, O'Malley's not ready for a guy like Sukmatot. Sukmatot's a veteran of the sport. He's been through, even before he made it to the UFC, he's been through a lot of solid opponents, outside of the UFC and some of the smaller organizations, of course. And he hasn't had an easy resume. He's had some really good fights, really solid wins over worthy competition out there. And what highlights Sukmatot's game is his stand-up skill, his power that he's got on the feet. He's got good knockout power. He's got good accuracy to go along with it. And again, he's got that kind of veteran experience. So he's not going to panic in fights at times. He's going to be able to perform well and just kind of pick his spots and do okay. But the thing here with O'Malley is, I went back through and watched as much footage as I could of O'Malley, and I was impressed. I think I underrated him initially in this spot against Sukmatot, to be honest with you, because I thought, he's just he's got a little bit of power. He's a flashy type of striker, but he's a little sloppy. Again, he's going to get picked apart. But the truth is, O'Malley's really not that sloppy. I thought he was a little bit more sloppy than I expected, again, going through the footage with him. He's actually pretty clean with his technical skill set on the feet. He's got some length. He's got some underrated power. You look at him, he's just a skinny young man. He's 23 years old, and you think, this guy doesn't have much pop in his punches. He does. He's got a little bit of knockout power with his hands. He's got some good kicking to go along with it. He mixes things up well. What impressed me the most was his defense. I mean, you look at him at times, you think, okay, he's got his hands down. He's going to get clipped. He's going to get caught by somebody. But his head movement and his footwork is actually really good. It's not like he's, getting lucky and avoiding this. I mean, it's how he fights. So the kid has good footwork, good head movement. He counters well. He's offensive when he needs to be. He's got a really solid wrestling game that you wouldn't expect coming from him either. So he's got the ability to take you down. He's got a submission game. He's only got one official sub, but he's way better than that actually indicates on the ground as well. So O'Malley, in my opinion, is, like I said, way better than I kind of gave him credit for. And in this spot with Sukmatot, I think he actually matches up fairly well with Sukmatot, because Sukmatot, if there's a problem with him, it's his tentativeness a lot of times. He won't put his foot on the gas and he won't throw those hands. So I think O'Malley's going to be utilizing that footwork and the movement, and he's going to be kind of landing more often than Sukmatot. Also, I should point out, if Sukmatot doesn't get O'Malley out of there, and win by knockout, I don't think he wins by sub. So he's going to probably have to win by knockout to get him out of there. If it goes to scorecards, Sukmatot is 1-5 as far as decisions go. So he's won one decision and he's lost 5. Now, granted, a lot of those have been close calls that could have possibly went his way or whatnot, but still, the judges do not seem to like Sukmatot's style. So this has a really good chance, I think, of hitting the scorecards. And if so, it's O'Malley's fight to win or lose as well. So there's a lot to like about O'Malley. And also, I have to say, in his last fight, I was really impressed with O'Malley's debut, his official UFC debut against Ware. That's kind of what you want to see in a fighter, because he started off really well in round 1. He faced some adversity in round 2, and I was expecting him to just kind of duplicate round 2 and round 3, and he put his foot on the gas. He looked a lot better in round 3. He had to pull out round 3 to get the win there, and he did it. So he dug deep, and again, he was tested against a pretty solid opponent in Ware, and he dug deep enough that he, no question, deserved to win that fight. So O'Malley, in my opinion, is a respectable 9-0, and he's got a lot of potential in the bantamweight division. Of course, he has a good camp behind him with the lab as well. So there's a lot of good things to like about O'Malley. So I'm expecting this to be a competitive fight. And how it basically comes down to is, if Sukmatot doesn't knock him out, I think O'Malley wins. And I think there's a better chance of that happening, O'Malley winning on the scorecards, or possibly getting a late finish. I think Sukmatot's obviously a pretty tough guy. I don't think O'Malley does finish him, but I think O'Malley can outpoint him and win on the scorecards. So initially, I like Sukmatot, but after going back through and digging deep, I like O'Malley now. So the pick is O'Malley, and it's a dog or pass situation since he is the underdog going into this fight, despite him opening the favorite.
And this fight could go either way. It's an interesting matchup, but yeah, I'm kind of leaning O'Malley too. Watching him fight against Ware just today, catching up on some research, I really thought what impressed me was the way he dug deep in the third round. I mean, O'Malley was slowing down a little bit in the second round, gave up the second round to Ware, and then just came out on fire, a man possessed in the third round, found a second wind, and just completely outworked Ware and ended up winning a decision. I mean, I don't even think anybody disputed that O'Malley should have won that decision. Sukmatot, on the other hand, he's kind of the guy that lets his opponent dictate things. He sits back and looks to find good counter opportunities. So he's willing to let his opponent outstrike him or throw more volume to try to find openings to land the big shots. And the big shots do land. I mean, he dropped Eric Perez 3 times in a fight that he ended up losing, which I think set a UFC record. And then against Luke Sanders, Sanders was much more aggressive than Sukumtat in the first round, won the first round, but then when he tried it again in the second round, he walked right into a nasty right hand that clipped him, and Sukumtat ended up getting the TKO victory over a very credible opponent. So with O'Malley, I think that there are going to be counter opportunities because O'Malley does throw at such a high rate, and he could leave himself exposed, but it's not going to be as easy as it seems. I mean, O'Malley leaves his hands down a little bit, but he balances that with really good head movement, side to side body movement, angles. He cuts good angles as he comes in. So if Sukumtat cannot figure out O'Malley, and if O'Malley can push the high pace and keep that pace going, then as long as Sukumtat doesn't knock O'Malley out, then I think O'Malley wins a decision. I completely agree with Nick. So Sukumtat does have power, and he does have the technique to pull this off, but O'Malley should have the pace and volume and the style that the judges are going to be more favorable towards. So my pick is going to be Sean O'Malley. Now, moving on to the co-main event of the evening in the featherweight division, we have Frankie Edgar, who is 21-5-1, taking on Brian Ortega, who is 13-0 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where did this line open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Edgar opened -155, Ortega +115. Right now, looking for betdsi.eu. It's currently Edgar -190, +160 for Ortega. So early action coming in Edgar's way. Not really that surprised by it. I mean, stylistically, all of us would probably think that this is a difficult matchup for Ortega. I mean, Edgar is one of the greatest all-time UFC fighters, in my opinion. I mean, his skill set is just so complete. He's a warrior. He's got a good chin. He's got good sub-defense. Obviously, his wrestling and his striking's on par as well. I mean, the guy's just a real complete fighter. I mean, if you were to build a prototype of what you would want a fighter to be, it's Frankie Edgar, really. So how does Ortega beat him? On the feet, Edgar has speed. He's got better boxing. He's got good wrestling, and his sub-defense is probably good enough to not get caught up. That's what most of us think. Looking back, though, at Ortega's recent fights and looking back at Edgar's recent fights, I actually think Ortega has improved enough that he's going to give Frankie Edgar fits in all areas of this fight. So I don't necessarily agree with the early action coming in. I think the line was actually set a little bit better as it was early on. And I think the public's kind of biting a little bit too much on Edgar at this point. Just because, like I said, if you look back, Ortega's striking has improved to the point I'm very impressed. I think that his strike defense, his movement, his power, his confidence across the board is actually a threat, even to Edgar. So, and we all know if the fight hits the floor, Ortega is definitely the kind of special submission artist that he can sub most people. I mean, you get your neck caught up in Ortega's arms, you're pretty much done. I mean, he's got slick technique. I mean, look at his last fight. The guy was able to adjust mid-air and sub Cub Swanson. I mean, his grip when he got that guillotine on Cub Swanson, nobody does that. I mean, so it was very impressive. Ortega's that special of a fighter, and he's a finisher. I mean, he's been trailing in fights before, and somehow, some way, he finds a way to get things done. Now, again, I know Edgar's on a different level. Like I said, I take my hat off to him. I think he's one of the all-time greats, but he's not a young buck anymore. I mean, he's getting a little bit older, and I think that Ortega's kind of catching him at the right time. Edgar's been on the shelf for a little while. I think, in my personal opinion, he hasn't been, minus that Yair Rodriguez fight lately. I mean, that was a beating, and that was an impressive performance that he did put on Yair. But before that, the Stevens fight was kind of tough for him. I think he didn't look that great against Aldo. Dating back to the Uriah Faber fight, I think he won that fight, obviously, but it wasn't his greatest performance either. So we might not be seeing the best days of Frankie Edgar here. And with the improvements of Ortega fight by fight, I think he's going to be in a battle here with Edgar. So I'm going to go against the grain here, and I'm going to pick Ortega to pull off the upset. I can't believe I'm saying that myself, but again, you look back and you see the improvements Ortega's making in the striking aspect of the game, and he's always a threat on the ground. I think stylistically it's a tough matchup for Edgar. He's going to have some size on Edgar, and with that skill set, he might be able to pull it off. So I'm going to go again against the grain. Ortega's a pick for me, even though it's probably an unpopular opinion. there is a possibility Ortega does get the job done. So I'm going to go against the grain, like I said, and pick him to win.
And I'll admit, I've been on the leader of the Brian Ortega hate train. I have not believed in him very much at all, mainly because of the way that he wins a lot of his fights, which is lose the first round, maybe even lose the second round, and then get a finish late to overcome the loss. That happened multiple times so far in his UFC run with the Diego Brandao fight, Clay Guida, Moicano. So I'll admit, I was not giving him a lot of respect. But then he fought Cub Swanson in his last fight, and I picked against Ortega. But guess what? I mean, his stand-up wasn't terrible. I still thought Swanson outstruck him, but Ortega was actually able to initiate grappling exchanges, and he had Swanson in huge trouble in the end of the first round and then put him away in the second round. So I, tip my hat to Brian Ortega. He clearly is improving, and I need to recognize that. And Frankie Edgar is, at this point, still one of the best featherweights or lightweights in the UFC, but you do have to remember, he's 36 years old. He's not going to be getting any quicker. His chin isn't going to be getting any better. That being said, like Brian Ortega, I don't see him winning a decision in this fight. It's a 3-round fight. Frankie Edgar has gas tank for days, and he has great foot movement. He'll be all over the place on the feet. So if Ortega's going to win this fight, it's probably going to have to be by stoppage. He has some power on the feet, as evidenced by the Guida knockout, and he obviously has elite submission ability. But Frankie Edgar's never been finished. Now, that happens eventually. A lot of times you see fighters start to get finished more as they get later in their career. So there's a first time for everything, and I'm not ruling out the possibility that Brian Ortega could finish Frankie Edgar. He could. But I think Frankie Edgar will be moving around very well on the feet, utilizing that Mark Henry boxing technique. Frankie Edgar's defense is significantly better than Ortega's. I mean, he's got 70% striking defense, and he has consistently faced some of the best fighters on the planet for all of his fights for the past, 6-7 years. Ortega's been working his way up, and he's only at 55%. So I think on the feet, Edgar should have a big advantage. Ortega's stand-up is improving, but Edgar should still have him. People forget, the Chad Mendez fight, I mean, he clipped Mendez, hurt him badly, and put him away. So Edgar does have a little bit more pop in his hands in the featherweight division. And with Ortega being relatively hittable, he might be able to do some damage here. As long as he doesn't overcommit, leave himself exposed, and Ortega jumps on some sort of takedown and submission. Edgar has used his wrestling a lot more in the featherweight division, but I would advise against that. I mean, Ortega is just too dangerous with his ground game. So if I'm Frankie's coach, I tell him to utilize your distance, your speed, your movement, and just try to outwork and outstrike Ortega over the course of 3 rounds, and avoid clinching exchanges, avoid using your wrestling, because you're just playing with fire. We've seen it multiple times now where a guy has Brian Ortega beat. He just needs to not get finished, and then he gets finished in the 3rd round. So I think Frankie Edgar is good enough to not get finished by Ortega, but we'll see. So Edgar is my pick, but I do think that if anybody could finish Edgar, it might be Brian Ortega. But again, my pick is going to be Frankie Edgar. So this takes us to the main event of the evening in the women's featherweight division. We have the champion, Chris Cyborg, who is 19-1 with 1 no contest, taking on Yana Kunitskaya, who is 10-3 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Cyborg open -1,500, Kunitskaya at +700. Right now, over at BetDSI, it's currently -1,900 for Cyborg, +1030 for Kunitskaya. I don't disagree with the action coming in Cyborg's way. Honestly, I think this is a terrible fight for Kunitskaya. She's not a bad fighter, but I do think she belongs in the bantamweight division, and of course, this is a featherweight for the featherweight title. So, in my opinion, this is a setup fight. I'm not going to get too much in detail about it. And I'm saying it's a setup fight because they want to get Cyborg another quality win, a highlight reel type of knockout. And I think she's going to end up getting it. So this is definitely a step down in regards to competition level. I think Holly Holm was a lot better and a lot more capable of beating somebody like Cyborg. Obviously, the line showed that back then as well in her last fight. Now with Kunitskaya, again, I'm just going to keep it at this. She's a pretty skilled fighter. She doesn't have bad striking. She's okay on the ground as well. She's just going to get overpowered here against Cyborg. I think Cyborg's going to land at will, and I think that Kunitskaya is not going to be able to take her strike. So I don't think Kunitskaya has enough power to respond back and give Cyborg any fits, to be honest with you, even though she's got 7 knockouts, I believe, on her resume. That's against lower tier competition, and I think Cyborg's going to be able to take whatever she has to throw at her. So stylistically, Cyborg keeps this fight standing and basically does what she wants, I think, in this spot. That's why you're seeing the line where it's at now. I kind of agree with it. Again, Cyborg's going to roll, and eventually I think we will get to see Cyborg versus Nunes. I want to see that a lot more than a lot of fights out there, honestly, for Cyborg. So I think that's a little bit of an intriguing fight, at least for her. But in the meantime, we're going to have to see some highlight reel type of knockouts, and I think Cyborg gets another one here.
Yeah, there's really not much competition for Cyborg at the moment, so the UFC dug back to the well and chose another Invicta Bantamweight champion to take on Cyborg. Kunitskaya, I mean, she is a pretty good fighter, but she's a pretty good bantamweight. And we haven't even seen her in bantamweight in the UFC yet. I expect her to drop down to bantamweight and fight in the UFC after this if Cyborg doesn't decapitate her. But you never know. I mean, that's how scary Cyborg is capable of being. And I know that Cyborg wants to do something impressive after going 5 rounds with Holly Holm in her last fight. So, Kunitskaya is a decent striker. She has some unique techniques. She has a pretty good kicking game, but I don't think she's as good as Holly Holm, not even close. So, I mean, she beat kind of Tanya Evinger, and then they reversed that fight, and then Evinger got the win back. And then after Evinger left to go to the UFC to fight Cyborg, Kunitskaya was able to claim the Invicta Bantamweight Championship. So I do think that she's a talented fighter, but again, she's a talented bantamweight fighter. And maybe she would be, in the top 10 in the UFC women's bantamweight division, but just with the lack of opponents and Megan Anderson still not being ready, and the UFC needing to make something happen here and put a fight together, Kunitskaya had to step in. So that's why this fight, the odds are just so ridiculous, because I don't think a lot of people are taking this fight seriously, and I don't think we should either. Cyborg probably just steamrolls Kunitskaya, ignores the power in her strikes, and then just tries to dish out her own. So I expect Cyborg to finish Kunitskaya at some point, probably the second round, just because she's been a little more patient lately than normal. And I do think that it'll be a highlight reel type finish. So my pick is going to be Cyborg. So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC 222. Now our premium bets for the event will be released this Friday following the weigh-in, so stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsBreaker premium member. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB on Twitter, because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Special thanks to BetDSI. Good luck everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.